name is Nada, and I'm the director here at Open Gov Hub. I'm really happy to be hosting you for today's discussion on kind of using technology to advance rights and justice, including for human rights defenders. So first, I'd like to ask for either in person or online, is this anyone's first time joining an Open Gov Hub event? If you can raise your hand. Yeah, very good. Well, there you go. And Rafael, who's our speaker. So again, welcome. For anyone who doesn't already know, Open Gov Hub is a meeting place, and we bring together lots of different organizations who have a common mission to help open up governments to be delivering better services to their people and to help empower citizens around the world. And the way that we do that is by facilitating a network of members, including some of you here today, so that we can share resources to be more efficient and so that we can work together to be more effective. Programs like this are one of the common ways that we bring people together to learn from each other and identify new partners. So we'll do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll introduce our speaker and jump right in. This is optional, but if you would like to share, your name and organization, and if there's any specific reason that you're joining today's discussion. So for our online participants, go ahead and you can do that in the chat. And then I might ask if anyone in the room wants to just, say hello, introduce yourself, and if there's anything specific that you're hoping to learn today. So this is optional. We can keep it informal. But yeah, did you all want to? Yeah.
Okay, so hi, my name is Tela. I'm the delegation of the Catalan government to the US. We are very interested in this area of the government. Our government is making a lot of efforts to improve in this sense. So we are here to learn what other people are doing, to learn and share.
Cool. Cool. And again, optional, but if anyone else wants to, just introduce yourself. You can also keep eating your pizza. So.
I'm Eliza, and I'm with a design startup called Normal Next, and the headline of today's event related to
Okay. Yeah, so I'm John Abbey. This is not my first time. I am with Blue Stream Group. I'm the CEO, and what I want to learn is how emerging technologies like AI and how is that impacting some of the government decisions around the globe?
Yeah, very much. Cool. Thank you so much. Great. And I see a few of you online also introducing yourself in the chat. Please feel free to keep doing so. Name, organization, and anything specific. Great. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, Rafael Namoon. He is the founder and programs lead for Horizontal, which is actually one of our newest member organizations who joined Open Gov Hub a few months ago. So this is kind of part of their introduction to the network. They are a virtual member actually. So Rafael is based out in the West Coast in California, but plans to visit DC a few times per year. And he can share more about the work that he's doing as well, but his background, a little more context. Previously, he was executive director for Build a Movement, doing lots of trainings on social movement building, and has also spent time studying and teaching at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. But Rafael, I'll let you introduce yourself further if you like. The format for today will be a conversation. So Rafael will give us a bit of background about the organization, and I'll interview you with a few casual questions, and then we will leave at least 15 minutes for discussion so that everyone can benefit from today's event. Welcome again, Rafael, and take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming out today. Let me try to find a way to not, so I don't see myself in huge. There you go. So hello everyone, my name is Rafael. I wish I was in the office with you all today having some pizza. I lived in DC for a few years, so those lunches were a pretty special part of my time in DC, and I definitely miss those. There's no such thing in Los Angeles. There's no brown bag lunches happening here. But yeah, my name is Rafael. I am from France originally. I spent a few years, on the East Coast, including Washington, D.C. for 5 years. And I moved recently to Los Angeles. I founded an organization called Horizontal. And so Horizontal works around technology in the broad sense of the word, with the idea to build the capacity of civil society groups, organizers, activists, human rights defenders, and more generally vulnerable communities, those who are most at risk of surveillance and censorship, or repression because of their identities or their work. And so we are aiming to build the capacity on the one hand, and I can talk a little bit more about what that's about later. And on the other, we build tools and apps also geared specifically for those groups and populations. In some cases, we actually build and develop software for specific organizations that contact us, and we're gonna fundraise together and just build whatever platform they need for their work. In some other cases, we build in-house tools that we think are gonna be most effective, or based on our relationships with people on the ground, what we think is most needed. So for example, one of our main tools is called Tela. It's a mobile app that protects users from repression and from surveillance as they document human rights violations. So, you know, it's been used for election monitoring. It's been used for just human rights documentation in the broader sense in places like, actually, I'm not going to name countries, but it's been used in pretty repressive environments. And what the app does is encrypt and hide some of the data that the users collect, the videos, photos, or maybe it's you know, text. The app encrypts and hides on the phone, so that if someone takes the phone, searches through it, and looks for something, they will have a harder time. No, it's not impossible, but they will have a harder time finding it. Yeah, so that's some of our program. We also do trainings. As I was mentioning earlier, we build capacity. So we do trainings and workshops on digital security. So how do you protect your data, your accounts, your identity, your social media accounts, your emails, as you communicate or as you operate online. And we've worked with really grassroots groups and movements, and also with international NGOs. So we've worked in DC, for example, with Oxfam, the DC office of Oxfam, or Reporters Without Borders. So same thing, a broad kind of range of support and groups that we support. But really the common thread is the needs and the focus of their work toward opening governments and better governance and human rights.
Thank you so much. So I'll jump into kind of ask you a series of questions, and then we'll open it up in the second half. So I'm really glad we're starting with this discussion for today, because I think, you know, we know that journalism especially, right, plays a critical role in open government reforms, and especially kind of uncovering, right, examples of corruption, examples of human rights abuses, whether that's happening from professional investigative journalists or citizen journalists. So I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about this process and how you think, again, digital tools can help support investigations, which really attract public awareness about these kind of longstanding, you know, again, corruption, human rights abuses that might be happening, you know, behind closed doors. I'm thinking of like the Pandora Papers, you know, as the most recent example of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, journalism is definitely one of those places where technology has made a huge difference, particularly investigative journalism. So maybe speaking concretely about specific tools. So one is going to be Signal. I'd be curious who here is in the room and on the digital room, like maybe raise your hand if you use Signal or if you know Signal. Okay, I see quite a lot of raised hands. So that's great. Signal was really developed for everyone, but the early adopters were journalists and activists to keep communication safe. I will say that just like a little tangent, Signal is great for journalists and it's been used, effectively for journalists to communicate securely and privately. But there's one big weakness that Signal has is that it's linked to your phone number. So in many cases, people who are investigative journalists who want to hide their identity when they're communicating with sources, for example, or with other people, government officials, for example, Signal is often not a good way of doing that. That's just something to keep in mind, because sometimes people talk about Signal or other tools are like the most secure or the most private, but really it depends on everyone's needs and everyone's threats. So Signal is a big one. Another one, and I don't remember what the Pandora papers used, but some of the ones that have been really interesting were global leaks. And that's really a whistleblowing platform where people can dump huge amounts of files and documents. And from there, you're going to have consortiums of journalists and media organizations taking it, analyzing it, and publishing it cooperatively. So global leaks has been, adopted on a really large scale. And I think most of the major leaks that we know of have come through global leaks as a software and a platform. Another one is called Secure Drop. And Secure Drop looks a lot like global leaks, but it's more, it's a lot more focused on one individual organization. Usually global leaks is deployed by consortiums of organizations, and Secure Drop is like one organization, like The Guardian. The Guardian is going to deploy their own server, and then they're going to have people drop files or information directly in it. And Secure Drop is developed by an organization called the Freedom of the Press Foundation. It's a great group and very privacy and security focused. So I think some of those are the most interesting that I know of when it comes to investigative journalism and especially anti-corruption. But then, that's what I feel like that's, the extent of what technology does. Of course, there is data analysis when there is like big data and stuff like that. But most of the time, the most critical piece is always the human component and who are the journalists and what are they going to do with the data itself.
Exactly. That's actually a perfect segue to my next question, which is about how horizontal finds your users, your partners. You said in the beginning that you're looking to work with people who are vulnerable, either because of their identity or because of the political nature of their work. So how do you find these people, and how do you do it in a safe manner? And what have you found, challenging, but also rewarding about your work so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before getting into the space, I didn't realize, but the human rights community in general, and the human rights and tech community is so small. Everyone knows everyone. It's really interesting. There are a few gatherings around the world pre-COVID that were happening pre-COVID, like the Internet Freedom Festival. There is another one called RightsCon, and a handful of other ones. And really, that's the extent of the community. But what that means is also it's really quick and easy to know who is in the community, and everyone knows everyone. And so that doesn't mean that all the communities are represented there, but at least there are bridges and there are people who can act as intermediaries in those spaces. So very often that's how we find our partners. It's either people who are in those gatherings, in those events, or even in events like this. I'm sure a lot of your organizations work with people on the ground. So we would be connected this way. Or we would be, hired for digital security training by Oxfam, for example, or by another organization for their local partners or for their local office. And this way we'd be connected to other partners. But it's really, I think the fact that we do both tool development and digital security training has been a really interesting formula, because very often people who develop tools do that in a silo. They do it, by themselves, wherever they live, wherever they are based. But for us, the digital security trainings give us access to really seeing firsthand what people's challenges are and the threats they face and how they interact with technology in a way that really informs the way we develop our tools. So that's been a really kind of fascinating way of doing the work. And I think at this point, the tool development is much larger, a larger part of what we do. But I feel like we should always try to keep on doing the digital security training, because we learn so much from it that we wouldn't be able to learn, secondhand or through other methods.
So I know that, this work is very complex, and that Horizontal is also a young organization. But I'd love to hear what you have experienced in terms of maybe like a success story. I'm sure, confidentiality is important with regards to this work, but if you could kind of, give us an example of a time in which the digital security trainings or the tools that you've developed, have enabled partners to achieve things that they couldn't have without them.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's some places where our app is deployed, Tela, where it's kind of public and we've mentioned it, so I can mention it here. One of them is Myanmar. Following the coup last year, actually just a year ago on February 1st of last year, the military junta engaged in very, very violent repression against civil society. And we've been in touch very closely with people working on the ground, and they started using our app, Tela. And so just to give you a little bit of background, what the app does, I mentioned, is encrypt and hide. Another feature is a quick delete button. So you can swipe a button and everything inside the app gets deleted. And that's a feature we've had since the beginning, since we launched 3 years ago. And it was always there. We never really knew whether people were using it because we don't have analytics for privacy preserving reasons. But we never really knew. People liked it, but often people like certain features and they don't actually use it. So we would get positive feedback, but we never knew if people actually used it. And actually what happened after Myanmar is that suddenly a huge, not a huge number, for our scale, a large number of people, a few hundred people started using the app. And suddenly we started hearing stories of how they were using the app. And so one example that we heard several times were people documenting protests and just taking videos of protests or of government abuse, military abuse, and storing it on their phone. And as they travel back home, for example, they go through a checkpoint. And so they're stopped by a military checkpoint. And so we heard of people who managed to take their phone out when they were waiting at the checkpoint, in the line to get searched, taking the phone out and being able to, quickly delete everything in the app. Even though the app was hidden and encrypted, they wanted to feel extra safe. They didn't want to take any risk. So they just deleted everything in the app in just a few seconds. And they went through the checkpoints smoothly. Nothing got detected or things like that. And so that was the first time we heard that, okay, this feature actually is useful, and even if it was 3 people in the course of 3 years out of hundreds and thousands, out of thousands of users that actually used it, it was worth having that feature there available for those who actually needed it.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, what you said a minute ago about you don't collect analytics for privacy reasons. I feel like that would be total sacrilege for like a traditional tech company, right? Like they live and die by their analytics. So I would just love to hear a little more about, what are some of those trade-offs that you try to balance, not just being, again, building digital tools, but really thinking about this specific community of people who are vulnerable because of their work and their identity and how you can.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big trade-off, the analytic part. Actually, there is a new analytical software or technology that has been developed in the community, in the tech and human rights community, to understand how people use an app without infringing on their privacy. So in the next few months, we may be able to kind of have access to this kind of data that we didn't up until now, but it's definitely a big sacrifice. Another one is that in a place like Myanmar, for example, a lot of people so everyone is on Android. That's the first thing. Like in the world, I think, Android has a 90 or 95% market share, and in those places it's more like 99% at least, maybe 99 or 99.5%, even more. So we develop primarily for Android. But the second thing is also that the devices that people have are old and low end, and they are not the latest, Samsung Galaxy S20 that is worth, $1,500 here in the US. So we have to develop with that in mind, because the mobile software landscape develops very quickly, and there's certain things that you can develop for a recent phone that is not going to work on an old phone. So we have to take a very different approach and say, okay, we want to make sure that people, in the case of Android, people with Android 5.1, so that I think 5.1 must have come out, in 2012 or 2013, so it's quite old, are able to use our tool effectively and have access to all the protection that the tool offers. And so that means we have to sacrifice on a lot of the new fancy ways of doing things in the newer versions of Android. And it's the same thing for iOS and iPhones, now that we're getting into that as well. So that's, those are some of the big trade-offs, but really we don't have a choice. Like, we need to make those trade-offs, because it's either that or we're going to develop something that people won't have access to, that won't be, won't actually reach the populations that we are developing for.
I have a question in the chat. Do
Yeah.
you want to take a pause and take one?
Let's go through a couple more questions and then turn to the chat, and also for those of you in the room, start thinking about what you'd like to ask. So I'll open up in just a minute.
Okay.
But just a quick follow-up on this point as well. I'm wondering what your legal status is as an entity, right? Because part of what you talked about, it could be commercial, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a hybrid entity. So does your governance structure reflect this kind of in-between status of developing tools that could have commercial value, but also having a strong mission?
We are just a regular nonprofit, and we are, thinking about potentially using some of our tools or commercializing some versions of our tools as a way to do generating revenue. Yeah. But we need to find a way of doing that without ended up spending, much of our time and resources on the commercial side. So we're still kind of exploring those options, but for all intents and purposes, we're a nonprofit, 501c3, exempt. We apply for grants, we get donations, the usual stuff.
Yeah, and actually that's a huge area of interest and passion of mine. If you want to speak more, and for anyone else in the audience too, earned income for nonprofits and kind of business models for social impact is definitely something we've been able to develop ourselves at Open Gov Hub, and also now we coach our affiliate hubs around the world to develop similar models. So it's I think there's a lot of power in developing something.
Yeah.
Be very careful, right? So that you don't lose it.
Yeah, and it's tough, because if you are in the work of developing, tools or programs for vulnerable communities, those are often not things that you can monetize, right? And they're just things that are never going to generate money. And so sometimes you also have to accept that that's just not possible. And so maybe the tool is going to remain what it is for those specific communities, and then there's something else that can generate some income. But there's also a risk of trying to stretch something, a program, so much to be able to accommodate everything that you end up, losing on both ends and not fulfilling any of the objectives.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, the example you gave earlier too is a good one, I think, where you said, in some cases, like an NGO like Oxfam might hire you all to do digital security training, but provide that to their local partners who may have less resources. So that's really interesting. Okay, cool. So I'll ask one more question for now, and then open it up. So again, speaking of partnerships, I know that many of us here in the Open Gov Hub community, are outside partners who want to support frontline local actors and social movements, but sometimes don't know the exact best way to do that. So even, recently USAID, for example, had a call for requests for information for this new people-powered initiative So even very large donors are trying to become better and more flexible to support social movement. But obviously there's some risks and some challenges with that. So what would be your advice, again, for the INGOs, the donors, you know, the Washington DC based organizations who do want to support frontline human rights defenders and corruption investigators in a way that is, you know, respectful and balanced and not intrusive, but supportive from the outside?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Tough question. I think a big part of it, and maybe you've already heard that many times, but is just reducing the bureaucratic burden on those groups. So often applying for funding is just really, really complex. I mean, USAID, forget about it. Right? Nobody that is a small nonprofit in the global south is ever going to apply for that, because it's just you need full-time staff to do that with an expertise on all those application processes. But for the grantees who want to sub-grantee or to support other organizations, yeah, just reduce the burden of applying, the burden of reporting. Those are things that are really distracting, that makes it really hard, and sometimes, you know, makes it not worth applying for programs, because if you're going to be spending you know, days and weeks applying and reporting, maybe it's better to just not get the money and then do something else, you know, and focus on something else. So I think that's a big part of it. And the second is to I would say leave things open, if possible. If the program, you know, if the grant you're making, and if you're doing sub grants and you're getting a grant from USAID or DRL or others, keep things open so that the ideas come from the bottom up, because, you know, nobody knows the needs on the ground other than better than the people on the ground. And so often we see funders shaping the agenda based on what they think is needed, and often it doesn't really match what people are seeing on the ground. And so when you have a very narrow call for proposal, for example, they will still apply and they will still try to make it fit, but they might end up, you know, just, it might be a lot of resources spent on something that is not exactly what is needed. So just keeping things open and using, you know, letting that creativity and those ideas flow up from groups on the ground.
Well, yeah, let's start to take some other questions. I know there was a question in the chat a minute ago. I don't know, maybe it's Belle, if you want to read that one off.
Yeah, the question comes from Kate Diaz, and she's asking if Horizontal has worked in Latin America or the Caribbean, and what has been your experience, if so? And lastly, are the apps available in different languages?
Yeah, so we've worked in Latin America and the Caribbean. To give you an example of countries, we've worked in Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, and we're in touch with you know, organizations in other countries. So our apps are generally available in multiple languages. Usually it's upon request. So if you bring a partner from Brazil, we're gonna try and get it translated in Portuguese. Maybe we'll partner to do the translation, or we'll identify translators together, or maybe we'll do it by ourselves. And the experience there has been generally positive. You know, some of those places are really hard to operate in. I don't need to explain why Cuba is so hard to operate in, but we have managed to work with people here, with people there. So yeah, generally it's been you know, positive experiences with some of the, you know, challenges inherent to those places. And yeah, on your follow-up about Nicaragua, we've worked mostly there with journalists specifically, and helping them actually through our app Tela. I think we might have done some digital security trainings there as well, but it's mostly through our app Tela, helping them identify how they can use it for data collection and documentation, and protecting the journalists themselves when they do investigation, when they do interviews, things like that. Yeah, and I'm happy to, talk about that in more details later if you want.
Are there questions in the room? Yeah, Max, go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking the time to present to us. Super interesting. One of my question is about how do you assess the communities or beneficiaries that you deem vulnerable, and who should benefit from your tools, and how do you decide who to provide them to? I mean, one could imagine people come to you and say, hey, I represent a vulnerable community in a democratic country that's concerned about surveillance, that's concerned about safety, election security, and our organization is called the Oath Keepers. Would you support them? Like, how do you assess a vulnerable group in this instance, and keep it from being used, let's say, in a potentially harmful manner? Yeah,
and what did you say the name of the organization would be?
Let's say they're called the Oath Keepers. Organization here in the US.
Yeah, no, this is a great question, and it's something that is kind of central to the debates around privacy, right, and encryption and all those different things. I think the main way that we vet organizations, because that's really what this is about, and groups is really word of mouth. And I mentioned earlier how it's all a small community and a tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. It's rare that there's going to be an organization that reaches out to us from Ecuador or from Zimbabwe, and that we ask the community, hey, do you know them? Can you vouch for them? What do you know about them? And nobody's going to be able to tell us anything. It's really, really rare. Because there's members of these communities that we're part of that are in Zimbabwe or that are in other parts of Southern Africa. So usually that's the main way we do it. The second thing I'll say is that it's kind of my standard answer when it comes to privacy and abusive or harmful groups like that, is that everyone has a right to privacy, and so we're not going to ban people from using our app, because the only way of doing that would be to survey users and to know who is using our app, and we don't want to know that, because if we know who's using our app, then hackers can find out and governments can find out, right? So we don't want to know who's using our app. But what we'll do is make sure that who we are providing active support to, so training and troubleshooting and just support and translation and all those different things, that is where we're really going to do some vetting and ensure that those are groups that align with our values. Yeah. But sorry, and I would be curious also about how others are doing that. If you have some pointers or how you vet groups and organizations, I'd be curious about hearing that.
You want to follow up on that?
No, it's not the area that I work in.
Okay.
So I'm just very curious.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because I know even for us, like Global Integrity, the parent organization for Open Gov Hub, we've often talked about partnerships criteria, and like you said, it's so important to start with your values, right? And that's kind of the approach that we take with the Open Gov Hub membership. It's really asking people who want to join, okay, tell us how you align with these 3 core values for transparency, accountability, and participation. So, but then it's still sometimes you need to do more work to get to the level of specificity where you feel confident. So, yeah, super interesting. Are there other questions?
My question is, have you run into any constraints with respect to the technologies that you use? Any constraint with the technologies?
What kind of constraints are you thinking of? Do you mean
the application, like what are some of the limitations? What are some of the things you can do with it and some of the things you cannot?
Yeah, absolutely. A big constraint is iPhones. So we started developing with Android because that's where most of our partners and communities are. But we've gotten a lot of requests for iPhones, particularly from journalists, actually, because journalists are often, even in the global south, are on iPhones. And iOS is a lot more locked down and restricted than Android. You can do a lot less stuff. On Android, for example, you can change the icon and the name of the app on the phone. So it looks like a calculator, or it looks like a weather app, or it looks like things like that, which is great for our users. It's exactly what we aim to do. On iPhone, you can't do that. So those are some of the really like the most challenging things. And we're now working on our first version for an iPhone app. So we're trying to figure out, how can we provide protection without over-promising things that we actually can't do on iPhone? Are there other things we can do on iPhone like that can still provide some of those protections? Yeah, so those are some of the constraints that we've faced when it comes to the tech. And another one, and I think that's really something that everyone in the community is really challenging, like facing very strong challenges around, is internet shutdowns. And that has become just such a common method for governments, to crush dissent, or to at least slow down dissent and protest movements. But apps like our app Tela, even though you can do most things offline, the point is that you share the data you collect with the world. And if you're not able to do that, it loses a lot of its interest, and the point, it just becomes a lot more difficult to do. So the community as a whole is thinking through, okay, how can we deal with internet shutdowns? One of the things we've been thinking about is maybe phone-to-phone data transfer, so that if I'm collecting some data, I'm gonna send it to your phone, and you're gonna send it to someone else, and maybe to someone else who is crossing the border and who can upload it to the internet, or just ways of keeping it safe on your phone, so that a week later, after the internet is restored, you can still upload it. But that's just a really, really hard thing that everyone is just trying to figure out at the moment.
I'd also love to ask just a bit broader question, but I feel like a lot of times the conversations that we have about technology, in like the social impact field, it's very black or white. Technology is the panacea that's going to save us, or it's like technology is spewing misinformation and it's making our democracies fail. So I'd love to hear, again, as someone who's working in this field, like, what do you think is maybe a more balanced perspective about the relationship that we, especially as like democracy activists, open government advocates, can have to technology, and how we should approach?
Yeah, good question. Definitely a black and white kind of conversation usually. And yeah, I think that technology is a tool, and a tool can be used for good, it can be used for bad. The same, like we were talking about earlier, the same analytical technology that's gonna help me understand our apps, or how our apps are used, is gonna help a government track and survey users and know who's using what and when and where. So yeah, to me, technology is agnostic. It's not good or bad. It's just how you use it. But I would also say that I think other than the what is the technology and what it does, a big thing that, in my opinion, we don't talk enough about, and that's why we're trying to change it at Horizontal, is how you do tech development, and how do you do technology in general. That I think is at least as important as the what you do. Because if, for example, you use Amazon AWS, which is the most important server provider in the world. If you use Amazon servers, AWS, in your work, and maybe you do good work and the what is great, but you are, giving some of your money and inherently some power to that organization that is so harmful in many, many other ways, right? or who, more generally, who is developing, who is designing, whose ideas are coming into fruition. And so I feel like just thinking about how we're developing technology, in addition to what we're developing, can also, change, hopefully, the landscape and the impact that we all have.
Other questions in the room or online?
First, well, thank you very much for all these very interesting information. First of all, where can I learn more about this Tela app? Very quickly, and I'd like to have more. And that was the general comment that I think will be put in this kind of double contradiction between these tools that they are developed for good, but at the same time they can be used for very bad things. And at the same time, it's not only you mentioned about Myanmar, Cuba, Nicaragua, these countries, but also in what it's called considered democratic countries. They are also the government that they are super illegally people for doing the job, and if they do it, and it's not precisely the illegal people. So everything is very complex. So sometimes I don't know, because it looks like we are not going in the right direction when we are having news about this NSO, Pegasus, use this country, your country, my country, they are using all these things.
Yeah, and I have one more question in the chat. I'll hold it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to take this comment first?
I mean, I don't think it was a question, right? It was just more of a comment, or I didn't hear a question.
I guess two parts, right?
Yeah, the first one,
tell us more about Tela app, yeah, where we can find it and so on, and then comments on just surveillance in developed countries.
So on Tela, so as I mentioned, it's available on Android. We're actually revamping the whole app, so version 2.0 will be out in about a month and a half. And the way it's been used, so I'll give you an example in Eastern Europe, in a pretty repressive environment. It was used for election monitoring. So what happened is that there were a few hundred election observers that were trained on how to use the app. And they were inside polling stations or outside of polling stations as well. And they had a form inside the encrypted container of the app. So they would unlock the app. They need to enter their PIN or their password every time they want to use it, decrypt it, and then from there, they can fill a specific form that asks specific questions depending on what the organization wants. So in the case of the election monitoring, it was asking, did you witness any electoral fraud? At what time did the managers of the polling stations come in? At what time did they leave? Did you see any suspicious activity? Things like that. So organizations are able to just ask the specific question they need based on the specific data they want to collect. And then users can fill it and send it on the spot, or they can save it on the app. And then when they reach an internet connection, they can upload it. They can also upload photos, videos, audio recording, things like that. And one of the things that we're going to do in version 2.0, so a brand new feature, is just file management, like you would do on any other phone or any other app for regular file management. You can create folders, you can organize your files, but all of that is encrypted in the app. So if someone takes your phone and try to access the app, without the PIN or the password, they won't be able to. And if you change the appearance of the app, if you make it look like a calculator, they hopefully won't be able to even find the app. Because of course, if they find it, they can always try to extract the password or the PIN from you. But if they can't find it, they don't see anything suspicious. They cannot ask you for anything because they don't see it. So that's some of the things that Tela does. I can definitely send you some more documentation. I'm happy to get on a call to, or if you have some follow-up questions on that, actually.
Yeah.
We'll we'll make sure, yeah, to
Okay.
get your contact info at the end and share with everyone who registered. Yeah, why don't we take the next online question, and then we'll start to move to our closing in a few minutes.
The question is from Tracy Just, and she's saying, great to learn about your work, thanks. And when you initiate a project with a partner, do you set it up so that the tools are there and then exit the project, or do you maintain a role in the project for the full lifespan of it?
That's a great question. It sounds like someone is working on sustainability of the programs that they are building up. So we've done a few different ways. Some of them are just our own tools, right? So we are in charge of maintaining them over time. We're going to develop it, maintain it. We're going to get a grant or a sub-grant and just keep developing it over time. A second way that we can do it is partner with an organization, and we develop a tool that all of our tools are open source, right? So the code is open, anyone can take it and keep on developing it. But basically, we're going to develop something that is open source, so it is no one's property, but it will still be the tool that we are the maintainers, right? So even though we are developing in partnership and we are doing the funding and the development in partnership, it's going to become kind of like a horizontal tool in the sense that we're going to be the main maintainers over time, because we think that it really aligns with our values. We want to keep doing it, long term. And we think that there is also a potential for us to generate income to maintain it. So that's the second way. And the third way is to do it much more traditionally, which is we do a project together. We're going to develop it over the length of the project. And then if there is some maintenance that is needed, we just reapply for more funding. And then we'll do that. And then once that's done, either we reapply or we let the platform, be. In one case, we developed a citizen participation app for a country in the Middle East. And that was really in very close partnership with the local organization. And so we developed it over the course of 18 months. Then the funding stopped. We handed it over to them so they could keep on managing it, but they don't have the tech capacity to update it and maintain it, but they keep on managing it. And now they're just applying for a second grant to just continue developing it, but with the objective of that once that second grant ends, it's just much easier to maintain. That some of the work we're going to do is just to reduce the maintenance needs essentially and make it more sustainable over the long run. So there will still need to be some maintenance, but it's going to be much smaller. And so we would be able to jump in, in a year or 2 or 3 from now if the platform is still there, or someone else can just pick it up and do that as well.
Yeah, very good. So yeah, last call for questions. I'll give people a minute to think about it. And I'll just ask you 2 final ones in these last few minutes to help wrap us up. So in a very practical sense, I'd love to hear from you a few really practical, good digital security practices that you would recommend all of us take, as organizations and just as individuals living in such a tech, influenced world. Like if we're not already doing these 3 things, go do that now. What would you advise, basically?
Sure. So the first one is strong passwords. And everyone and still I see some people advising and saying a strong password needs to have lowercase, uppercase, special characters, all of these things. That is generally not true anymore. Like we understand now that what is most important is just that the password is very long. It can be 4, 5, 6 words, and it's very random in the sense that it's nothing that can be connected to your life. So no birthday, not the name of your firstborn, not the name of your dog, not the name of your favorite, football team, just something that is completely random. So just using something that is long, and if you can't remember, and that would be totally normal, can't remember, 76 really long and random passwords, use a password manager. My favorite is Bitwarden because it's open source I just sent it in the chat. But you have other ones, 1Password, LastPass, they're all good. So that's the first one, passwords and password manager. The second one is two-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication is just adding a second step to accessing your account in addition to a password. So usually it's either a little code that is sent by SMS, or it's something on an app. So you can find guides online if you just type in two-factor authentication. And the last one that's really for at an organizational level is permissioning. And it's really thinking about in your organization, who has access to what, and just minimizing who has access to what. So if you have sensitive documents, maybe some members of the team don't need access. And it's not about excluding people, it's not about restricting, who has access to information, but the more people have access, the more likely, there will be a mishap, or there will be someone's personal account that is hacked, and then, the hackers get access to that sensitive information. So really just minimizing all of that access and putting in place some permissioning schemes that will protect that data.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, do we have any final questions online?
No, but is it okay to share your email in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm typing it right now.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So Rafael@wearehorizontal.something.com.org. Okay, perfect. So I'll give you also, Rafael, a minute to think about like a final word that you want to share with us. But yeah, any final questions in the room? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Does the digital divide play a role in how effective this becomes?
So sorry, I couldn't hear the end, but you're asking about the digital divide?
Yeah, basically, how does that affect your regular operations?
Yeah, great question. One thing that we try to think about, particularly because we work on mobile apps, we work on mobile and web apps, but for our mobile apps, we think a lot about SMS. SMS is, everyone, at least in the developed world, kind of think of SMS as completely passé and over, but really it's still the most common and most used method of communication in the world, and really the most accessible, including to very poor communities. So we try to think about how to use SMS as a method to do data collection, to do communication and things like that. So that's one way that we try to think about it. And the other is shared devices. Often people who don't have the means to have their own tablet or their own phone share a device. So that also has privacy and security implications. But other than that, we do technology. And so we just try to think about, we just try to keep just that idea of the digital divide always when we design products. And I think we try to be a little bit pragmatic, which sometimes comes off as cynical, but pragmatic about, what can technology actually achieve? A lot of the issues we are all facing, and particularly oppressed communities, is not going to be solved with technology. And so technology can be a tool to support movements and support civil society groups, but it's not going to solve in itself. So we try to keep that in mind as we work with our partners.
Absolutely. So we're almost at time. Just to help us close us out, if it's okay, Rafael, I'll ask you a very last quick question. I asked you, I think, when we first met, but we're always looking to make connections, obviously, in the Open Gov Hub network. So basically, what do you need help with, and also what can you offer to help others?
Yeah. So first of all, I already got some help from Open Gov Hub with Hamadoun, who's helping with some of the accounting.
Oh, good. Yeah. We didn't plan that, but I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. And I would say some of the difficulties we have as an organization, one is hiring. because we try to hire from the communities directly rather than, techies from the Silicon Valley. We just try to hire people really from the communities who have that knowledge. So if you know people, who are from, some of the communities that you work with, and who do design or development, engineering, product management, things like that, definitely send them our ways. We have job openings on our website. So that would be one. And a second one is we are all remote and distributed, and we struggle with being, an engaged organization for our members. So if you have ideas or thoughts or the way you deal with remote work to make sure people are not isolated, it's also something that we are always trying to improve on, to make sure that our members and our team feels like a team more than anything else.
Yeah, there's actually a new peer group on people and culture. I don't know if they've had any virtual members yet join, but we've had a few meetings here, so I'll make that connection. Well, amazing, thank you so much. So very last thing, we always try to close with a few takeaways. This was such a rich discussion, so thank you so much. I won't capture it all, but just very quick, a few points that I heard. Number one, Horizontal builds both the digital tools and offers digital security training, which gives you a really unique perspective on what people need who are vulnerable to surveillance and other attacks. Number two, some of the valued security features you all have with the app like Tela is, greater encryption, hiding the app, hiding content, quick delete options that again can help protect people who are at risk. And then number three, technology, it's not black and white. We should think of it agnostically. It's a tool that can be used for good or for harm. And we need to ask ourselves, not just what is the tool, but also how are we using it and how are we supporting, different structures. So I hope that gives us a few nuggets to take away, but please join me in thanking Rafael so much for our conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. And I hope we get to meet in person sometime soon.
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much again. So we'll make sure to share your contact details and wish you a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.